In the vast tapestry of biblical history, where giants walked the earth and angels mingled with humanity, there exists one figure whose story defies everything we think we know about mortality, death, and what it means to truly live in communion with the divine. His name was Enoch, and his extraordinary tale begins in the shadowy period before the Great Flood, in an age when the world was young, and the boundary between heaven and earth was far thinner than it is today. The book of Genesis tells us something remarkable about this man in just a few short verses, yet those words carry a weight that has echoed through millennia. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. But what does it truly mean to walk with God? And why was Enoch's relationship with the Creator so unique that it literally changed the very nature of his existence? Today, we're going to dive deep into one of the most mysterious and fascinating accounts in all of Scripture, uncovering truths that will challenge your understanding of faith, purpose, and the incredible potential that lies within human connection to the divine. Picture, if you will, the world as it existed in Enoch's time. This was not the world we know today, scarred by centuries of sin and decay. This was a world still bearing the fresh imprint of divine creation, where men lived for centuries rather than decades, where the earth yielded its bounty with supernatural abundance, and where the spiritual realm was not the distant, abstract concept it often seems today, but a living, breathing reality that intersected with daily life in ways we can barely comprehend. Enoch was born into the lineage of Seth, the son given to Adam and Eve after the tragic loss of Abel. This was the godly line, the descendants who called upon the name of the Lord, while their contemporaries in the line of Cain built cities and pursued earthly achievements. But even within this righteous heritage, Enoch stood apart. While others lived good lives and honored God in their own ways, Enoch discovered something more profound, more intimate, more transformative than mere religious observance. He discovered what it meant to walk with God, as Adam had walked with God in the garden before the fall. The Hebrew word used to describe Enoch's relationship with God is halak, which means to walk back and forth, to go continually, to live one's life in constant movement and communion with another. This wasn't a Sunday morning relationship or an occasional prayer offered in times of crisis. This was a minute-by-minute, breath-by-breath, heartbeat-by-heartbeat communion with the Creator of the universe. Imagine waking up each morning, not just to another day of routine and responsibility, but to another day of adventure and discovery with the God who spoke the stars into existence. But here's where Enoch's story becomes even more intriguing. The scriptures tell us that Enoch lived 365 years, and then he was no more because God took him. In a world where men routinely lived 800 or 900 years, Enoch's lifespan seems almost cut short. Yet this apparent brevity was not a punishment, but a reward beyond imagination. While every other human being who had ever lived faced the grim reality of death, Enoch experienced something that would not happen again until the prophet Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind centuries later. He was translated, transformed, taken up without tasting death. The book of Hebrews provides us with additional insight into this remarkable man, telling us that by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Here we discover the secret of Enoch's extraordinary relationship with the divine. It wasn't just that he walked with God, it was that his walk pleased God in a way that was rare and precious. But what does it mean to please God? In our modern world, we often think of pleasing God in terms of moral behavior, following rules, attending religious services, or performing good deeds. While these things certainly have their place, Enoch's example suggests something far deeper and more intimate. The Hebrew word for pleased carries the connotation of delight, satisfaction, and acceptance. Enoch didn't just avoid displeasing God, he actively brought joy to the heart of the Almighty. Consider the profound implications of this. The God who created galaxies and governs the movements of planets, who sustains every atom in the universe and knows the number of hairs on every head, found such delight in his relationship with one man that he chose to bypass the natural order of life and death to bring Enoch directly into his presence. This tells us something extraordinary about both God's character and human potential. The early church fathers and Jewish traditions provide us with additional glimpses into Enoch's remarkable life. According to these sources, Enoch was not merely a passive recipient of divine favor, but an active participant in God's work on earth. He was described as a preacher of righteousness, warning the increasingly wicked world of his time about the coming judgment. Some traditions suggest that Enoch received visions of future events, including the great flood that would cleanse the earth in Noah's time, and the ultimate judgment that would come at the end of all things. The apocryphal Book of Enoch, while not considered canonical scripture, provides fascinating details about what this walking with God might have looked like. It describes Enoch receiving tours of heaven, witnessing the throne room of God, learning the secrets of creation, and understanding the intricate workings of the spiritual realm. Whether or not these specific details are historically accurate, they point to a truth that resonates throughout biblical history. Those who draw near to God with sincere hearts often find themselves privy to divine mysteries that remain hidden from the casual observer. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Enoch's story is not what it tells us about one exceptional man from the distant past, but what it reveals about the potential that exists within every human heart. Enoch was not born with supernatural abilities or divine DNA. He was a descendant of Adam, bearing the same fallen nature that we all inherit. Yet through his choices, his faith, and his persistent pursuit of communion with God, he achieved a level of intimacy with the divine that literally transformed his very existence. This raises profound questions about our own spiritual journeys. If Enoch could walk with God in such a way that death itself was conquered, what possibilities exist for us? The New Testament tells us that through Christ, we have been given every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realms, and that we are called to walk worthy of the calling with which we have been called. Could it be that Enoch's example is not merely a historical curiosity, but a prophetic glimpse of what God desires for all his children? The Apostle Paul speaks of being caught up to the third heaven and hearing inexpressible words. The Apostle John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day when he received the revelation that became the Book of Revelation. Throughout church history, mystics and saints have reported experiences of divine communion that echo something of what Enoch must have known. These accounts suggest that the kind of intimate fellowship Enoch enjoyed with God is not relegated to the pages of ancient history, but remains a living possibility for those who seek it with their whole hearts. Yet Enoch's story also serves as a sobering reminder of the world in which such intimacy with God was both possible and necessary. The scriptures tell us that in the days before the flood, the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. This was a world where every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. It was into this moral and spiritual darkness that Enoch's light shone brightest. There's something profound here about the relationship between divine intimacy and cultural opposition. Enoch's walk with God was not developed in a monastery or a pristine spiritual environment. It flourished in the midst of a world that was rapidly descending into chaos and rebellion against God. This suggests that intimate communion with the divine is not only possible in difficult circumstances, but may actually be intensified by them. As we look at our own world today, with its increasing moral confusion, spiritual darkness, and hostility toward divine truth, perhaps we are meant to see in Enoch not just an ancient hero, but a contemporary model. Maybe the very conditions that seem to make intimate fellowship with God more difficult are actually the precise conditions in which such fellowship becomes most precious and most powerful. The nature of Enoch's translation also speaks to something that resonates deeply with human longing. Death has been humanity's great enemy from the beginning, the final frontier that no amount of human achievement can ultimately conquer. Yet in Enoch's story, we see death defeated not through technology or medical advancement, but through the simple yet profound power of intimate relationship with God. This points forward to the ultimate hope that Christians hold, that death itself is not the final word, that there is a life beyond this life, and that those who know God will one day experience the fullness of that life in ways that transcend our current understanding. But Enoch's translation was not just about escaping death. It was about entering into a fuller experience of life itself. The God who created us for fellowship with Himself has always intended that our existence should be more than the brief span of years we experience on this earth. Enoch's story suggests that this fuller life is not merely a future hope, but a present possibility for those who learn to walk with God as he did. The practical implications of Enoch's example are staggering. If one man could develop such intimacy with God that it literally transformed the nature of his existence, what might happen if entire communities of believers began to pursue that same level of communion? What if churches focused less on programs and more on teaching people how to walk with God in their daily lives? What if individual Christians saw Enoch's example not as an impossible standard, but as an invitation to discover depths of spiritual experience they never knew existed? The key to understanding Enoch's story may lie in recognizing that walking with God is both simpler and more radical than we often imagine. It doesn't require special education, religious credentials, or perfect circumstances. It requires what Enoch had: faith, persistence, and a heart that finds its greatest delight in communion with the Creator. The Hebrew word for walk suggests movement, progress, a journey undertaken together. Enoch didn't achieve his remarkable relationship with God in a moment of sudden enlightenment, but through years of faithful, daily choosing to align his steps with divine purposes. This daily aspect of walking with God cannot be overstated. In our age of instant gratification and quick fixes, Enoch's example reminds us that the most profound spiritual realities are often developed through consistent, patient cultivation over time. Like a friendship that deepens through years of shared experiences, conversations, and mutual understanding, Enoch's relationship with God grew stronger and more intimate through daily choice and practice. Yet there's also something supernatural about Enoch's story that we cannot ignore. While his walk with God involved human choice and effort, the ultimate transformation he experienced was clearly a work of divine grace. God took him. This was not something Enoch achieved through his own power, but something God accomplished in response to Enoch's faithful pursuit. This balance between human responsibility and divine sovereignty runs throughout the biblical narrative and offers both encouragement and humility to those who would follow Enoch's example. The legacy of Enoch extends far beyond his own remarkable life. His great-grandson Noah would carry the righteous line through the flood that destroyed the corrupt world of Enoch's time. The faith that characterized Enoch's walk with God became part of the spiritual DNA passed down through generations, ultimately leading to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and eventually to the coming of Christ himself. In this way, Enoch's intimate relationship with God had consequences that rippled through history and continue to impact our world today. Moreover, Enoch's story provides a bridge between the paradise that was lost in the Garden of Eden and the paradise that will be restored in the new heaven and new earth. In the garden, Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the day until sin shattered that fellowship. Enoch's life demonstrates that even in a fallen world, such intimate communion with God remains possible for those who seek it with their whole hearts. And his translation points forward to the ultimate restoration, when all who know God will experience the fullness of that divine fellowship for eternity. As we conclude this exploration of Enoch's extraordinary life, we're left with profound questions that demand personal response. If God found such delight in one man's faithful pursuit of divine friendship that he literally changed the rules of mortality to honor that relationship, what might he do in response to our own sincere seeking? If Enoch could walk with God in a world far more corrupt and violent than our own, what excuses do we have for settling for distant occasional contact with our Creator? The story of Enoch is ultimately not just about one remarkable man from the ancient past, but about the incredible potential that lies dormant within every human heart. It's about the truth that the God who created us for fellowship with himself has never stopped pursuing that fellowship, never stopped delighting in those who seek him with sincere hearts, and never stopped working to transform ordinary lives into extraordinary testimonies of divine grace and power. Enoch walked with God, and it changed everything. The question that remains is whether we will choose to follow in his footsteps, discovering for ourselves what it means to live in such intimate communion with our Creator that even death itself becomes not an ending, but a transition into fuller life. The path is open, the invitation extended, and the God who delighted in Enoch's friendship waits to welcome us into that same transformative relationship. The only question is whether we will take the first step.